Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And today we're looking at a figure whose biography has been a much requested addition to this channel. We're looking at Henry VIII's little sister, Mary Tudor. Before we jump in, I want to thank Native Deodorant for sponsoring today's video. I have been keen to try native deodorants because I've seen them advertised and they sounded like the product that I have been on the hunt for ages. Something that works, so keeps you smelling fresh all day, but that doesn't have aluminium, parabens or sulfates in it. Having tried native deodorants for the last month, they do just that. They are made from simple, safe ingredients like coconut oil and shea butter. They are also vegan and cruelty-free. You can pick from lots of scents. I picked unscented. I picked coconut and vanilla, which comes out as being very sweet and chocolatey smelling. And I also picked lavender and rose. To me and on my skin, the lavender is the more obvious part of this fragrance. This was my favourite deodorant out of the three that I picked. Native have recently teamed up with Jungalow, an LA-based lifestyle brand, to launch a collection of limited edition deodorants and body washes in limited edition packaging and in a collection of new scents, including Paradise Flower and Amber, Tangerine and Citrus Blossom, Palm Leaf and Bergamot, and Sandalwood and Fig. I must say, I am really keen to try that last one because sandalwood is one of my favourite fragrances. I like the fact that these deodorants don't feel sticky on the skin, that they dry down really quickly, and that I could still smell the fragrance of them at the very end of the day. There is also free shipping to the US. But Native doesn't just do deodorants, they also have amazing body washes and toothpaste. But wait, there's more. Last year, Native donated over $2 million worth of product to Hope and Comfort, a non-profit organisation that is working to end hygiene insecurity. 3 deodorants are normally $36, but if you use my link and code, READINGPAST, you'll get them for $24. That's 33% off. With my code, you can also get 20% off any body wash or toothpaste. Thanks again to Native for sponsoring today's video. Now it's time to talk Tudor. Mary Tudor. As far as I'm concerned, it is entirely understandable and completely forgivable for somebody to be a little confused about the true life and identity of the sister of Henry VIII that we are discussing in today's video. Because, well, like so many of us, that person has probably watched The Tudors. Here we are, at the Masque of Chateau Vert. King Henry VIII is shown to be fascinated by the woman playing Perseverance, Anne Boleyn. In history and in truth, in this masque, Mary Tudor, the king's sister, played the part of Beauty. Here we have Beauty in the Tudors. However, confusingly, she is going by the name of Margaret. Now, we'll be unpacking all sorts of skullduggery in terms of the fictional leaps of this series in this video, the Margaret to Mary of it all. But for now, we're going to look at the story of Henry's baby sister as it is presented in the Tudors, under the name of Margaret. It soon becomes clear that Margaret is unhappy with her brother. He's marrying her off to someone that she thinks will be distasteful, a much older man, the King of Portugal. We see Margaret extract a promise, although it's really not even a half promise if we look at Henry's face, that for her consent to this planned union, she will have her free choice of husband once she's widowed. So nice to see Margaret planning ahead there and also making clear what her ideals are for her future husband. Before long, she's being shipped abroad, accompanied by Henry's BFF, Charles Brandon. He has recently been advanced to the title of Duke of Suffolk, because he sits so high in Henry's personal esteem. When it comes to Margaret and Charles Brandon, you can cut the sexual tension with a knife. Margaret marries her Portuguese king. Not much of the graceful, diplomatic and perfectly trained princess on display here, though, because the new Queen of Portugal's disgust is not even partially being hidden. The wedding night is played up for all of its revolting worth. As the storyline moves on, we then see Henry's sister killing her husband, the King of Portugal. She, this murderer, is then allowed to return to England, seemingly within a day or days, and she's in the company and bed of Charles Brandon, who has never left her side. The pair are shown making plans to marry, which they then do. Despite his frankly half-hearted promise, Henry, when he finds out, is incandescent with them both. He banishes them and even threatens to kill Charles Brandon. We see that the marriage of Margaret and Charles is not a happy one. Brandon is repeatedly unfaithful. Margaret is very disapproving of her brother's plans to marry Anne Boleyn, and she attempts to intercede to get him to change his mind. Margaret's death, coughing up blood in a puddle of milk, is as odd as it is tragic. In fact, I wonder if maybe we might get a perspective from a film or media expert. What is the narrative device being used here visually? Do let us know in the comment section. I'm sure we'd all find that really useful. But what does the history say? Why on earth have I been banging on about Margaret when this video is about Mary? I mean, it's right there in the title. Henry's sister, Mary Tudor, and I refer to her as Henry's sister to differentiate her from the other Mary Tudor, Henry's daughter, and also from the other numerous Marys who were also historically significant in early modern England, named for the mother of Jesus and for each other. Perhaps that's why we have what seems to be a take on Mary's story being attributed to Margaret in the Tudors, because the number of Marys would be too confusing. The real Mary was one of 8 children, born to King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. 4 of her siblings would die very young, leaving her as the youngest surviving child, with 2 elder brothers and a sister. Mary was born in March 1496, with the 18th being frequently offered as the precise date of birth. Her eldest sibling, Prince Arthur, heir to the throne, would pass away aged 15 on the 2nd of April 1502, just a few months after his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. How much Mary would have remembered him is debatable. After all, in the months after his marriage and before his death, he and his bride had taken up residence in Ludlow, and they were there from November 1501. Mary was only 5 years old at this point. However, the loss of an heir would no doubt have cast a very long shadow, and a shadow for an extended period. Any sense of grief or loss perhaps hits even heavier when that loss is then compounded by a further loss. Mary would lose her mother just before she turned 7, on the 11th of February 1503. Elizabeth of York died from postpartum complications in the royal apartments of the Tower of London. She had given birth to a little girl, who died within days. On the 8th of July 1503, Mary would have to bid farewell to another family member, her 13-year-old sister Margaret, who began her journey to Scotland to join her husband, James IV of Scots, to begin her new life as his queen. Now, of course, in the Tudors, we do have Margaret, but the path of the character we are shown in this TV series is clearly intended to be that of Mary, Henry's sister, rather than Margaret, Henry's sister. Henry VII was left melancholic through his loss. His own health suffered, and he would gain a reputation for having a miserly preoccupation with the business of state. Throughout his reign, his 2 obsessions seem to have been balancing the books and, after the death of Arthur, curtailing any youthful exuberance or risk-taking on the part of his surviving son. I think that it's possible that Henry VII would have seemed to be a detached and unaffectionate father, even by the standards of the day, and that perhaps these circumstances explain the apparent closeness and affection that were shared by Mary and her brother Henry throughout almost all of their lives. Mary's childhood as part of the English royal court is somewhat obscured. For example, we don't know the exact details of her education, such as what she was actually instructed in by her schoolmaster. That being said, it is recorded that she did have a schoolmaster. It is presumed likely that her studies would have included Latin and French, however. We think it most probable that one or more of her ladies, those that attended upon her, are the ones who can claim credit for providing her with the expected feminine and courtly skills for a fashionable young woman, who, because of the height of her birth, would one day be expected to ornament the finest courts in Christendom, most likely as the wife of a ruler. If in her future life Mary were to be judged successful, she would have to become beloved of her new people and her husband. She would need to prove fertile in the making of heirs, spares, and marriageable daughters, all the while being a diplomatic agent who successfully and deftly pressed the causes of her birthplace. She would also be expected to have grace and proficiency in the games of court, in music, dancing, and in embroidery. According to the reports of those who saw her, Mary was a pretty and charming child who would grow into a beautiful, charismatic, and accomplished woman. In 1506, the 10-year-old Mary provided entertainment for the visit of Philip I of Castile at Windsor. Philip was the husband of Joanna or Juana of Castile, who was herself the sister of Mary's former and future sister-in-law, Catherine of Aragon. Mary danced and played music on her lute. As young as she was, by our standards at least, she managed to charm the visitors with her grace. Philip's eldest son, Charles, nephew to Catherine of Aragon, had been born in 1500. He would go on to become the Emperor Charles V, and he was proposed as a husband for Mary. Negotiations were taken seriously and would continue to be so despite the death of Charles's father Philip in September 1506. In the aftermath of Philip's death, negotiations were undertaken by representatives of Henry VII and Charles's grandfather, the Emperor Maximilian. A deal was reached, and a marriage treaty was signed at Calais on the 21st December 1507. A formal betrothal, where Charles was represented by proxy, took place nearly a full year later, on the 17th of December 1508. At this point, Mary was nearly 13. Charles was 8. All agreed it would be best to wait for a few years before bringing this couple together in person to start their married life fully. But it seemed that Mary's path was mapped. Her future would be as Charles's wife, mother to, hopefully, numerous Habsburg boys and girls. Mary was orphaned by the death of her father on the 21st of April 1509. She was now the sister of the king, Henry VIII. The new king was a few months shy of his 18th birthday, and he was keen to direct his youthful exuberance towards defining himself as a warrior king. Like his namesake Henry V, this new king had set his sights on war with France. The Holy Roman Empire and Emperor was an ideal ally. This plan was, of course, one already in motion, because Mary was set to marry his grandson and heir, Charles. Henry VIII himself had already married, less than 2 months after his father's death, his own brother's widow and Charles's maternal aunt, Catherine of Aragon. After her father's death, Mary had started exchanging gifts with her betrothed. it looks like she was showing herself to be very willing to see this match through. Another Tudor-Habsburg treaty was signed in October 1513. This one agreed that Mary and Charles's marriage would be completed by the 15th of May 1514 at the latest. She would be 18 years old, Charles would be 14. The agreed marriage completion date, however, came and went. Henry soon began to grow frustrated and concerned. It seems he was worried that he and his sister might be publicly humiliated by a sudden Habsburg reversal. So, on the 30th of July 1514, Mary repudiated her marriage contract to Charles. Her hand in marriage was promptly reassigned, this time to the 52-year-old French king Louis XII. The treaty secured peace between France and England, at least for the time being. If Mary found her new match distasteful, if she was repulsed at the thought of marriage to a much older man, this is not recorded. Fiction has filled the gaps, with premarital tantrums, furious complaints, and desperate bargain brokering with her brother. That isn't to say it didn't happen in private, of course. Perhaps she was revolted, but was willing to serve the diplomatic needs of her brother. It's feasible that the thought of obtaining the title of Queen of France may also have been a suitable balm to any concerns. Perhaps she simply felt she had too little time to complain, as arrangements were moving at such a pace. There were proxy marriages in France and England. Mary and her retinue, which included Charles Brandon, set sail for France and her waiting bridegroom on the 2nd of October 1514. According to reports, it was a rough crossing, with one of the ships in the fleet being shipwrecked. But a seasick Mary landed safely in Boulogne the next day, on the 3rd of October. After regaining her composure, she would meet Louis on the 8th and celebrate their marriage on the 9th. On the 10th, Louis dismissed most of his new wife's attendants, those who had come with her from England. This act came much to his new wife's displeasure. It left her feeling vulnerable and isolated, and this is despite the fact that she could quite clearly have communicated with those around her, being, as we know, she did speak good French. It's clear, though, that she trusted her brother to have enough concern for her welfare to complain bitterly to him about these dismissals. Although Louis did not recall his wife's retinue, it seems that he was put under sufficient pressure that he did offer an explanation of his actions, which seemingly pleased both Mary and her brother Henry, and this smoothed out what could have been a diplomatic incident. That being said, two English women in particular are recorded as serving Mary in France. They were Anne and Mary, the sisters Boleyn. Mary's coronation as Queen of France took place at Saint-Denis on the 5th of November 1514. As in the Tudors, Henry's brother-in-law was apparently plagued by gout. Mary would be widowed within weeks. Louis died on the 1st of January 1515, and Mary was blamed for his demise, but not as his smothering murderer. Rather, it was claimed that her youth and energy, when claiming her duties from him as his wife, proved to be too much for the ageing man. Although Brandon had accompanied her to France and stayed a while, he had been recalled to England by Henry just before Christmas. So he was gone long before the death of Louis. It was not his imminent departure that could have acted as a motive for suffocation. Nevertheless, Brandon was ordered to make a speedy return to France once word of the king's death had reached England. Henry trusted his best friend to safeguard his sister in her new position of Dowager Queen of France, especially to ensure that she would not be married off in a way that would not benefit Henry and England. Mary's future marriage to Brandon had been proposed to Henry and was apparently under consideration as a possibility, once, of course, an appropriate mourning period had been observed, by the English king's sister. Of course, this also bought Henry time, with his little sister back in England and under his control, that he could forget any promise made to her or to his friend in order to marry her off in a more diplomatically advantageous direction. Because, let's be clear, she is still a king's sister and now the former wife of a king. Marrying her off to a countryman does make fairly minimal sense. It seems that Mary was keen to take herself off of the figurative chessboard of international state marriages, because Brandon and Mary did obtain royal support for their marriage from the new King of France, Francois. They married in secret in Paris in mid-February 1515. When Henry VIII found out, he was furious that his sister and friend had embarrassed him on the international stage due to their secrecy and deception. Mary took the blame. Brandon, on the other hand, chivalrous as ever, claimed he was powerless to deny her in the face of her weeping. So essentially, "I had to do it, Henry. Your sister cried at me until I did what she wanted." The couple set out to return to England and Henry in the middle of April. As it turned out, it would seem that distance and time had had a positive effect on Henry's opinion, or at least it had diminished much of his fury towards them. So much so that Henry deigned to meet the couple at Burling in Kent on the 3rd of May 1515 as they made their way home. It was also allowed for their marriage to be celebrated publicly on the 13th of May at Greenwich. This was, of course, a ceremony rather than something showing that Henry himself celebrated the fact they were married. He might be willing to permit it, but he wasn't going to show himself to be overjoyed at the choice. S.J. Gunn provides further reason for the couple's apparent acceptance by their king, explaining, "Henry's displeasure was mollified by the surrender of Mary's jewels and plate, half her dowry, the wardship of the now redundant Lady Leal, and a further £24,000, payable over 12 years from the profits of Mary's dower lands in France." The public acceptance of their union by Henry thus came at a hefty financial cost for the couple. Mary and Charles would have 4 children, 2 sons who died young. Both were called Henry, and they were born in 1516 and around 1522-3, respectively. They would also have 2 daughters, who would live long enough to marry and have children. The elder daughter was Frances, born on the 16th of July 1517. Her younger sister was Eleanor, and she was born at some point between 1518 and 1521. The eldest daughter, Frances, would go on to marry Henry Grey, a union that would produce 3 surviving daughters, one being Jane Grey. There are indications that suggest that Mary suffered with poor or fragile health for much of her life. So, considering this, it's probably a good thing that after her marriage to Charles Brandon, she does not become a permanent fixture at the royal court with all its busyness and bustle. Rather, she would make occasional appearances, usually at just significant times. So, in October 1518, she is at Greenwich to celebrate the betrothal of her 2-year-old niece, also Mary Tudor, to the Dauphin of France. In 1520, she sails with her brother Henry to be by his side for the celebrations of the Field of Cloth of Gold. 2 years later, on Shrove Tuesday, the 4th of March 1522, Mary is recorded as taking the role of Beauty in the Masque of Chateau Vert at Wolsey's York Place. If we think back to the start of this video, this incredibly famous court celebration is shown in the Tudors to be occurring before Margaret/Mary's marriage to the ageing King of Portugal/France. So clearly, as is frequently complained about in regard to this TV series, there is a bending of both space and time that's going on here. In 1527, Henry VIII's great matter got underway, as he sought to extricate himself from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon in order to marry Anne Boleyn. Henry's pursuit of his wife's lady-in-waiting thoroughly disappointed his sister. Indeed, when Henry and Anne travelled to meet King Francois of France in 1532 to get his support for the union, Mary refused to attend. With that being said, it is very possible that Mary's ill health would have prevented her from making the journey, even if she had fully supported her brother and his paramour. Clearly, whatever concerns Mary had and expressed, they did absolutely nothing to give Henry pause. As I'm sure we all know, Anne and Henry were willing to defy anyone to marry, and they did marry, probably in early 1533. Anne would be officially recognised as Henry's queen on Easter Saturday, the 12th of April 1533, and she would be crowned at Westminster on the 1st of June 1533. The tensions between this new royal couple and the king's youngest sister were still causing division on the 25th of June 1533. On that date, Mary died at Westhorpe in Suffolk. It is thought that she may have finally succumbed to tuberculosis. She was buried in the Benedictine Abbey of Bury St Edmunds, but Mary would not be able to rest in peace, because the abbey would be surrendered to King Henry VIII in 1539 as part of the dissolution of the monasteries. It was therefore stripped of all its valuables and allowed to fall to ruin. Mary's body, out of respect, was moved to St Mary's Church in Bury St Edmunds, and it is there that she remains. But her rest would be disturbed again, this time in 1784, when her tomb was accessed so that locks of her hair could be taken for collectors. Horace Walpole is one individual who is reputed to have possessed one of these stolen locks of hair. David Loades offers the following assessment of Mary. He states, "Mary was important for who she was, rather than for what she did." But what do you think of David Loades' assessment of Mary Tudor, of the way her story was retold in the TV show The Tudors, and or of anything else in regards to her story that we've looked at today? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video, or you can find me over on social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box, so you can follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then why not share it with some friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel. And if you think you're subscribed, then maybe have a little check now, just to make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you. And while you're there, checking or subscribing, why not hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button so that YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I do hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.